Alrighty, the first thing you're going to want to do is carefully read the following prompt. It states, read carefully the following poem by Marilyn Nelson Winique. Then write an essay analyzing how Winique employs literary techniques to develop the complex meaning that the speaker attributes to the century quilt. You may wish to consider such elements such as structure, imagery, and tone. So first you're going to want to realize what you're going to be writing about. In this case, you're going to be writing about the literary techniques to develop the complex meanings. I'm going to highlight that. Finding the complexities of the quilt and its meanings will be crucial to writing an effective and persuasive essay. Next thing you're going to want to do is figure out how to find evidence within the poem to build your argument. The use of evidence within the essay in the prompt. There are examples such as structure, imagery, and tone right here at the end. But you are not limited to these, and you can also bring in different elements of poetry which can be used. An important note is that when they give you options such as structure and other literary elements, do not use these three terms as a formula or blueprint to your essay. Do not focus so much on the elements that you forget to tie back to the argument or back to the larger meanings and the complex themes of the work. Lastly, what you're going to want to do is create a graph or a form of organization that can assist you in finding connections between the literary devices and the themes you find in the work. In my personal opinion, I like to find small areas like this and use asterisks. And then I'll write out what I'm going to be writing about in my 3 body paragraphs and find the evidence within the text.
So I'm just going to read the poem to you so you understand what we're going through, since it's short. My sister and I were in love with Mima's Indian blanket. We fell asleep under army green issued to Daddy by supply. When Mima came to live with us, she brought her medicines, her cane, and the blanket I found on my sister's bed the last time I visited her. I remember how I planned to inherit that blanket, how we used to wrap ourselves at play in its folds and be chieftains and princesses. Now I found a quilt I like to die under, 6 Van Dyke brown squares, 2 white ones, 1 square, yellow-brown of Mama's cheeks. Each square holds a sweet gum leaf, whose fingers I imagine would caress me into the silence. I think I'd have good dreams for 100 years under this quilt, as Mima must have under her blanket. Dreams she was a girl again in Kentucky, among her yellow sisters, her grandfather's white family, nodding at them when they met. When their father came home from his store, they cranked up the pianola, and all of the beautiful sisters giggled and danced. She must have dreamed about Mama when the dancing was over, a lanky girl trailing after her father through his Oklahoma field. Of my childhood miracles, of my father's burnt amber pride, my mother's oak gray gentleness within the dream of myself. Perhaps I meet my son or my other child, as yet unconceived. I'd call it the century quilt, after its pattern of leaves. So once you read this poem, you have to immediately go back to the prompt to remind yourself what you're looking for, such as the meaning behind all of these phrases and the literary devices such as structure, imagery, and tone. So once you read it, you should automatically point out themes such as a family of multiple colors, the power of the past and how it affects the author now, how strong her imagination is, and how her dreams enable her to fantasize about the future, and how there are many generations linked up within this poem.
Now I'm going to be going over with you some effective analysis writing skills. In order to write a 9, you must first be able to read the poem with an open mind and large understanding of the multiple meanings being presented, just as Sydney has. Some examples of these meanings are the family of multiple colors, the power of the past, of imagination, and of dreams to create the future and the links among generations. The meanings can and should be connected back to the overall theme of the poem. One important connection you should focus on is the meaning of the quilt and the connections with her family history that it symbolizes to the speaker. Another effective way to use analysis is by inserting quotes. But when you insert a quote, you don't want to leave it unanswered. Scorers are going to be looking for quotations that offer substantial interpretations of at least one or two of the three meanings of the quilt and connecting them with the memories of the past, dreaming both past and present, and related patchwork quilt to the speaker's family. Some common student errors that they were finding in this essay were that the students with weaker essays were not looking into complexities of the poem's presentation of her family and its history. They were writing about the quilt, but they tended to fall into easy generalities about warm blankets and reflecting on some of the cases with their own childhood favorites, and then supporting these assertions with truisms or cliches about the evidence in the poem. So you're going to want to steer clear of any cliches or just generalities in general. In order to prepare for writing a 9 on the essay, one of the things the graders look for and are telling students to do now is reading the poetry closely. Close reading is so important to finding the multiple meanings and connections in between a work. Overall, being able to close read poetry will help and assist you in finding the meanings and literary techniques. Search for the complexities of the meanings and which elements of the poem create and enhance these themes. So they're going to be looking for descriptive summary, not just summarizing the poem with general words, and looking for analysis of its meanings, and recognizing that the meanings are often plural in the most complex poems, just as this one has many meanings that Sydney has earlier pointed out.
So right now we're going to go over the differences between scores and what the scorers expect. So if you notice, there's a lot of these scores are grouped together like a 9 and 8, 7 to 6, 3 and 4. So that means that these scores can be closely tied, and it's just the little bits of effort or understanding that can push you into a higher score. So we're going to go over a 9 and an 8 because that's the purpose of this video, to try to get everybody to a 9. So the essays have a persuasive analysis. So that means when you go through and write about what you're trying to say, you have to be strong, affirmative, and like prove you know what you're saying, you know what you're talking about, and you're trying to convince others that this is a way to interpret the poem. And they use the literary techniques to develop complex meanings that the speaker attributes to the quilt. So complex meanings like the poem references generations, so how does the generations tie in exactly with the quilt, and how they overlap, and the colors, how those bring in. So you want to make sure to, like Darby mentioned before, stay away from cliches. You want to further develop the meanings behind the quilt. They offer a range of interpretations, so again, away from the cliches. You want to look at one part of the poem and see how many ways this can be interpreted, or even the whole poem. How can the whole poem be interpreted, like different ways? Convincing readings of both complex meaning and describe to the quilt, and use of literary elements. So they are consistent and have control over the elements of composition. And so what they support is consistent. They don't like contradict their own writing, and it has effective persuasion over what they are writing. And what's important to know is language appropriate over poetry. So poetry has its own definitions on how it's written and structured. Like, it's way different from prose or open-ended. It has its own set of guidelines. So you have to make sure that you use language that connects to poetry more than prose and open-ended. Textual references are apt and specific. So textual references like the colors, the shapes that are used within the poem. And so these essays, like, they're not going to be error-free, and they realize that, but their essays are just so strong and persuasive, and they offer so much interpretations and complex meaning that they demonstrate how they are a strong writer, they are clear in what they say. And that is how you score a 9. It has to be especially persuasive.